Today, we step into the dark shadows of a seemingly ordinary marriage, where the secrets between a young wife and her much older gynecologist led to a tragic and deadly conclusion. What happens when a forbidden love affair spirals into blackmail and fear, ultimately ending in cold-blooded murder? Emma Ward had always been the quiet type. Growing up in a small town in Iowa, she was the youngest of three siblings. Her older brothers, always the center of attention with their outgoing personalities and achievements, left Emma in the shadows. Her father, Richard Holmes, a strict and often emotionally distant man, favored his sons, praising them for their athleticism and academic achievements. Emma, on the other hand, was often overlooked, her quiet demeanor mistaken for weakness. Her mother, Evelyn, while loving, was also passive, never standing up to her husband's overbearing attitude. Emma spent most of her childhood feeling like an afterthought in her own family, desperately seeking attention, but never quite finding it. As she grew older, this desire for validation followed her. In high school, Emma was smart, but never stood out. She excelled in art, but her achievements went unnoticed compared to her brother's constant recognition. By the time she graduated in 2003, Emma had become used to blending into the background. She was soft-spoken, often ignored, and found comfort in her own quiet world. Her friends came and went, but no one ever really stayed. She longed for someone to notice her, to see beyond the surface, and appreciate who she was. This craving for attention became a deep-rooted need, something that would shape her future relationships. It was during her time in college, around 2005, that she met Daniel Ward. He was the opposite of everything she had ever known. Outgoing, driven, and attentive, Daniel saw Emma in a way no one else had before. They met at a local charity event, where Emma had been volunteering in the art department, creating flyers and posters for the cause. Daniel was instantly drawn to her, and for the first time in her life, Emma felt seen. Their connection was immediate, and within months, they were inseparable. He adored her quiet nature, and she loved the way he made her feel important. By early 2006, they were married, much to the surprise of their families. Daniel was supportive, always encouraging Emma to pursue her interests. He had just started a promising career in marketing, and his future looked bright. Meanwhile, Emma had dropped out of college after just 2 years, unsure of what she really wanted. She had felt lost, her passion for art fading as her focus shifted to building a life with Daniel. By the end of 2006, they had settled into their home in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and soon after, Emma discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and fear, a mix of emotions that made her question her readiness for motherhood. Emma had always struggled with confidence, and the idea of becoming a mother brought all her insecurities rushing to the surface. Would she be good enough? Could she raise a child without the emotional support she had lacked as a child herself? Daniel was thrilled about the baby, and his excitement helped ease her doubts. But deep down, Emma still felt the need for reassurance, for validation from someone who could fill the emotional void left by her father. In early 2007, as her pregnancy progressed, Emma was referred to Dr. Harold Benson, a well-known and highly respected gynecologist. Dr. Benson, at 46, had built a reputation as one of the best in the area. With decades of experience, he was known for his professionalism and the care he provided to his patients. On the morning of March 6th, 2008, Emma disappeared. Her husband reported her missing after she failed to return from what he thought was a routine checkup. Little did he know, that was no ordinary doctor's visit. Later that evening, police were called to Dr. Benson's office after a cleaner found Emma's lifeless body. She had been strangled with a leather belt, and her body was carefully hidden in a back room, locked away. The scene was chilling in its precision. There was no sign of struggle, no witnesses, and it was clear that Dr. Benson had meticulously planned the murder. Taking a deeper look at the doctor, Dr. Benson was charismatic, respected in the community, and known for his professionalism. However, behind the mask of a family man was a deeply troubled individual, struggling with feelings of inadequacy and a growing obsession with his younger female patients. Emma was no exception. By the fall of 2007, Emma's life had taken a turn she could have never anticipated. What had started as innocent doctor visits had evolved into something dangerous, something that weighed heavily on her heart. Dr. Benson had become more than her gynecologist. He had become a figure of obsession and control in her life. The affair had begun gradually, sparked by those long conversations in the exam room. He asked questions no one else had ever asked her, about her childhood, her marriage, her deepest fears about becoming a mother. Each question peeled back a layer of her vulnerability, leaving her exposed in ways she had never experienced before. Dr. Benson was careful. He never pushed too hard, never made her feel uncomfortable in those early months. But there was always something lingering beneath his professional demeanor. Emma found herself drawn to the attention he gave her. With each appointment, the boundaries blurred until they no longer existed. The flirtation felt harmless at first, like a small escape from the mundane routine of her life at home. She told herself it meant nothing, that it was just a passing phase. But as November 2007 approached, Emma could no longer deny what was happening. The secret meetings had started late at night, when the clinic was quiet, the staff long gone. Dr. Benson made sure everything was discreet. He locked the doors, turned off the cameras, and whispered words of reassurance to keep her coming back. Emma didn't want to admit it, but a part of her craved those late-night encounters. He made her feel alive, seen, and important, in a way she had never experienced with anyone else, not even Daniel. But the guilt soon began to consume her. At home, Daniel was still the same loving, attentive husband he had always been. He was working harder than ever to provide for their future family, spending long hours at the office to ensure they would have a stable life when the baby arrived. Meanwhile, Emma was drowning in shame. Each time she looked at Daniel, her heart sank under the weight of the lies. She told herself it had to stop, that she couldn't live this way. Yet, every time she tried to pull away from Dr. Benson, he found a way to pull her back in. By December of 2007, Emma had tried to end the affair multiple times. She told Dr. Benson that it was over, that she couldn't continue betraying her husband. But Dr. Benson was not the type of man to be rejected easily. He had grown accustomed to the control he had over Emma, and the idea of losing her wasn't something he was willing to accept. His demeanor shifted during these conversations. The once gentle and caring doctor became cold, calculated. He would remind her of the messages they had exchanged, the photos she had sent in moments of weakness, the private moments they had shared. It was no longer about the affair, it was about power. He made it clear that one word from him would destroy her life. He knew how to play on her deepest fears, her insecurities. Emma, who had already spent her life feeling invisible and inadequate, was now trapped in a nightmare. If Daniel ever found out, her world would collapse. The thought of losing everything terrified her, and Dr. Benson knew that. His threats were subtle at first, but they soon became more explicit. He told her that he would send everything to Daniel if she ever tried to leave him. Emma's anxiety grew with each passing day. By late December, the pressure was unbearable. She would spend her nights lying awake, wondering how she had gotten to this point. The once exciting secret affair had turned into a cage, and she was stuck inside with no way out. Every time she returned to Dr. Benson's office, she felt her sense of control slipping further away. He would greet her with the same charming smile, the same gentle words, but now they felt like chains. She was no longer in control of her life. He was. The baby was due in a few months, and Emma was desperate to break free before it was too late. But every attempt to end the relationship only made things worse. Dr. Benson would remind her of the evidence he held, and she would fold under the pressure. How could she tell Daniel, the man who had given her everything, that she had been unfaithful? The thought of his heartbreak was unbearable. She was trapped, and the fear gnawed at her day and night. The secrecy, the lies, it was all too much. By early February 2008, Emma had reached her breaking point. The guilt had become too heavy to bear, and she knew she couldn't go on like this. She had tried so many times to end it quietly, to walk away without any confrontation, but Dr. Benson refused to let her go. He wanted her under his control, and as long as he held the power, she couldn't escape. On the afternoon of February 3rd, 2008, Emma made a decision. She could no longer live in fear. She had to confront him, tell him that it was over once and for all. If he refused, she would confess everything to Daniel, no matter the cost. She couldn't continue living with the lies, the constant dread of being found out. When she arrived at the clinic that evening, she didn't feel the usual rush of excitement she had felt in the early days of their affair. Instead, she felt a cold sense of determination. She had to take back control, even if it meant risking everything. But as she stepped into Dr. Benson's office, she could feel the tension in the air. He sensed that something was different, that she was no longer the timid woman he had manipulated for months. Emma confronted him, telling him that it had to end, that she would confess everything to Daniel if he didn't let her go. She laid it all out in front of him, not realizing how far he would go to protect his secret. Dr. Benson's reaction was nothing short of chilling. The look in his eyes shifted from shock to something far more sinister. He was a man backed into a corner, and now he would have to make a choice. Would he let her go and risk losing everything? Or would he take matters into his own hands to ensure his secret remained hidden? As February turned into March, the tension between Emma and Dr. Benson escalated. She had no idea what dark thoughts were running through his mind, no idea of the lengths he would go to keep her under his control. What had started as a thrilling secret affair was now a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. Emma was no longer just a young woman caught in a bad decision. She was trapped in a nightmare, with no clear way out. The confrontation had set something in motion, something that would change both of their lives forever. On the morning of March 6, 2008, the quiet routine of Cedar Falls was shattered. Emma Ward, who had left for what her husband believed was a routine checkup with Dr. Benson, never returned home. Daniel Ward, who had always trusted his wife's gynecologist to care for her and their unborn child, began to worry as the hours ticked by. By the afternoon, his concern grew into panic. Emma never stayed out without telling him where she was, and he knew something was terribly wrong. Daniel called the clinic, hoping to hear that Emma had simply stayed later than expected, maybe a complication with the pregnancy or a long discussion with the doctor. But no one had seen or heard from Emma after her appointment that morning. The clinic staff was unaware of any reason why she would have gone missing. That evening, filled with dread, Daniel reported Emma missing to the police. The truth behind Emma's disappearance would soon come to light in the most horrifying way. Later that night, at around 9 p.m., a cleaner at Dr. Benson's office was finishing her routine after-hours duties. As she moved through the clinic, wiping counters and straightening chairs, she noticed a strange smell coming from the back room, a place that rarely needed cleaning. Curious and a little uneasy, she opened the door, and what she found inside would haunt her forever. There, hidden behind a stack of medical supplies, was Emma's lifeless body. Emma had been strangled with a leather belt, her body carefully placed in a way that suggested Dr. Benson had taken his time concealing her. There was no visible sign of struggle, no sign that she had fought back. The scene was disturbingly precise, meticulously planned, as if Dr. Benson had thought of every detail to avoid suspicion. It was clear from the moment the police arrived that this was not a crime of passion. This was a cold, calculated murder. The discovery made every single soul in that small town scared to bits. No one could believe that a trusted doctor, a man who had served the community for decades, could be capable of such a crime. Dr. Benson had always been seen as the model professional, someone people turned to in times of vulnerability, especially women like Emma, who had trusted him during one of the most delicate times in her life. But as investigators began to peel back the layers of Dr. Benson's life, they found that the respectable facade he had built was nothing more than a mask. On March 8th, police brought Dr. Benson in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. He claimed he had seen Emma earlier that day for a routine checkup and that she had left the office shortly after. But as investigators pushed further, inconsistencies began to emerge in his story. He couldn't explain why Emma's car had been left in the clinic's parking lot, or why her phone had last pinged near the office at the time she was supposed to have left. By March 12th, forensic investigators found crucial evidence that would seal Dr. Benson's fate. Emma's DNA was found on the very belt that had been used to strangle her, and security footage from nearby cameras showed her entering the clinic but never leaving. It was becoming increasingly clear that Dr. Benson had not only murdered Emma, but had planned every detail of her death with chilling precision. As the investigation deepened, more disturbing revelations came to light. Several former patients came forward with stories of inappropriate comments, lingering touches, and unwanted advances. These encounters had never escalated to the level of Emma's relationship with Dr. Benson, but they painted a picture of a man who had long been crossing professional boundaries. It became clear that Dr. Benson had been using his position of power to manipulate vulnerable women for years, hiding his predatory behavior behind a veneer of professionalism. Emma had been one of his many targets, But unlike the others, she had tried to break free. And when she threatened to expose the truth, Dr. Benson's obsession with control had pushed him to commit the ultimate act of violence. He couldn't allow Emma to tell her husband, couldn't risk his entire career unraveling. In his mind, silencing her had become the only option. As the case against Dr. Benson mounted, the town of Cedar Falls was gripped by a mixture of disbelief and fear. How had no one noticed the darkness lurking behind Dr. Benson's calm exterior? And how many other women had been victims of his manipulation, but had remained silent out of fear? By March 20th, the evidence was overwhelming. The police arrested Dr. Benson, and the community was left to grapple with the horrifying reality that one of their most respected citizens had been living a double life. Neighbors, friends, and colleagues were in shock as the story unfolded in the media. It wasn't just about the murder. It was about the years of hidden desires, the slow unraveling of a man who had lived a life of secrets and manipulation. The trial, which began in early 2009, became a spectacle that captivated not only Cedar Falls, but the nation. During the trial, Dr. Benson's defense team tried to argue that the relationship had been consensual, that Emma had become emotionally unstable and had threatened to ruin his life. They claimed that her erratic behavior had driven him to act in self-defense. But the prosecution had a far stronger case. They presented Dr. Benson as a man consumed by obsession, someone who had systematically preyed on vulnerable women and, when faced with losing control, resorted to murder. The most damning piece of evidence came from the forensic team. The precision with which Emma had been strangled, the calculated manner in which her body had been hidden, and the lack of defensive wounds on her body all pointed to a deliberate, premeditated act. Dr. Benson had not acted in a moment of panic. He had planned the murder from the moment Emma had threatened to confess to her husband. On April 5, 2009, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Dr. Harold Benson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom fell silent as the judge handed down his sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Daniel, Emma's family, and the entire town of Cedar Falls, the verdict brought a sense of justice, but it could never bring back the woman whose life had been cut short by a man she had once trusted. Dr. Benson's fall from grace was swift and brutal. The man who had once been revered as a trusted doctor was now a convicted murderer, his name forever associated with the dark secrets he had tried so hard to keep hidden. But for those who had known Emma, for Daniel, the pain of losing her would never fade. The trial had revealed the depths of Dr. Benson's obsession, but it also left lingering questions. How many other lives had been affected by his actions? How many more secrets were still buried in the past? In the end, the murder of Emma Ward was a tragic reminder of the darkness that can hide behind even the most trusted faces. And as Dr. Benson began his life behind bars, the town of Cedar Falls was left to pick up the pieces, haunted by the memory of a woman whose life had been stolen by a man who had once sworn to protect her. But was this the full truth? Could a seemingly quiet, dedicated doctor truly become a cold-blooded murderer? Emma's story was a tragic reminder that even the people we trust the most may have the darkest secrets. It's very similar to this case we have where a wife's affair with teenage neighbor's son ends deadly. Don't forget to like and subscribe and check out this insane case. You'll definitely be shocked.